All right, here we go. Hey, this is Warren Redlick. Thank you so much for watching. I'm here with Ryan Tanaka of Neurapod, the Neurapod channel. If you're interested in Neuralink, you should be subscribed to Ryan's channel. I believe I put a link to his channel in the description of the video below. We're doing this live. This is the first time I've done a live stream on YouTube in a while because YouTube has been demonetizing my live streams. This video, I think, is so clear of any potential anything that would bother YouTube that we should be okay. So let's go forward. Want to see how this does. If we get demonetized again, it's very unlikely I'll be live streaming on YouTube for a long time if that happens with this one. So, and I always get cleared for monetization later. It's just after I get all the views and you know, don't get any money anymore because anyway. So I had this idea and I thought of Ryan as somebody to talk about with this idea. People who follow Elon know that Elon is concerned about the future of humanity, that we're not having enough children. If the average woman has less than 2 children and you iterate that over many generations, human population goes to 0. The average woman has to have at least 2 children in order for a human population to be stable. You want it above 2 to grow. If it's below 2, it will eventually go to 0. In some countries, it's now down to like 1.3, which means a rapid path to extinction of the human species. And Elon talks about spreading the light of maintaining the light of human consciousness, spreading it throughout the solar system, the galaxy, beyond. So and Elon has this company, Neuralink, which is why I asked Ryan to be on. Ryan is the Neurapod channel is the channel for Neuralink news. If you're able to have a brain-machine interface, it's conceivable down the road that you might be able to upload your mind or your consciousness into a cloud, download it onto a bot or some other substrate. And I wanted to talk about that with Ryan because Ryan knows this. Ryan, what do you think about the idea first about uploading our minds, our consciousnesses to the cloud, replicating them? What could we do with that? Is it conceivable that could happen in the future? And where do you see that going?
Yeah, I think it's going to be possible to make a duplicate of our consciousness. I'm not sure that we'll be able to probably do it or Neuralink will probably be able to do it, where regular humans won't be able to distinguish between a regular human that has normal, built-in consciousness versus a digitally duplicated version of that same consciousness. So therefore, it'll for all practical purposes, it'll feel like, yeah, we've uploaded consciousness, and everybody's consciousness will be accessible. And I think Elon's mentioned this in the past, that artificial intelligence will get better than humans in every single way, smarter than humans in every single way.
Let me just pause you for a second. For people who are watching, we are live. This is not recorded. I have been doing recorded videos on YouTube in the past with a live chat. Ryan and I are live talking now. I am monitoring the chat. And so I may be in the chat a little bit, but not as much as usual. YouTube has a feature called Premiere where you can play a recorded video and have a live chat with it. This is actually a live conversation and we will be responding to the chat at some point. The chat is for subscribers only, and the chat is on a 60-second slow mode. So you can only enter a chat message once every 60 seconds. And we're going to be talking about Neuralink and the future of humanity and whether human consciousness can spread into the solar system, the galaxy, beyond, a lot of things about that. We'll probably talk about Tesla at the end of the video, Tesla, boring company, other things like that. But I wanted to focus on this topic now. So Ryan, sorry, I'm cutting you off. Keep going, please.
That's okay. I basically finished what I had to say. I last mentioned that Elon was saying that eventually artificial intelligence will become smarter than humans in every single way. And I think we've seen signs of that already occurring with the computers beating humans in chess, and then in the game of Go, which has I forget how many permutations, but it's like practically infinite. And humans didn't realize that the computers could beat us. And then when that computer made certain moves, the world's professional Go players were in awe. And I think in the future, that's what's coming.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different things. So the first question is, like, we know right now with the monkey mind pong video that Neuralink was able to implant electrodes into a brain chip into a monkey's brain, and that monkey was able to control a computer mouse, was able to play pong, was able to move a mouse left, right, up, and down with its mind only. And we've seen other other examples of brain interfaces like the Utah array, being able to maybe bring vision into the optical cortex in a small scale, and a Neuralink connected to the optical cortex might restore vision to the blind. I think there are already hearing devices that can connect to the brain. What is it called? The cochlear implant actually restores some hearing. So the potential for Neuralink to provide functional relief to humans in the short to medium term of curing brain diseases, helping paralyzed people manipulate objects, maybe eventually walk. All those things are pretty, I think you and I, it's not that they're easy, but they're pretty straightforward. We can see those coming, right?
Correct. Relatively speaking, compared to like the uploading of consciousness and all that, I think it'll be lower hanging fruit. And that's where they're starting. Neuralink is working on allowing paralyzed patients be able to control a computer keyboard and mouse with just their mind. And that's already actually been demonstrated, and they've been going through this group called the BrainGate research team has been going through human trials already, where they've demonstrated wireless brain-machine interface implants that have this capability. And then on top of that, Neuralink has already demonstrated this in a macaque monkey. So it's like, what's the difference between a monkey and a human in that context? Very, very, very little. Like, right. If you can do it in a monkey, why not be able to do it in a human?
Right. So the bigger picture that I see, and I want to address a question from Moon in the chat on this, is right now we're talking about dealing with some basic functionality. But if you read Ian Banks' novels, the Culture series, there's this concept in there called neural lace, which I'm pretty sure helped inspire Elon to pursue what because Elon has said that's his favorite series of novels, science fiction novels. I think he said that. I mean, I've read that he said that. I don't know if he said, I never heard him actually say it, but he supposedly likes that series. And Neural Lace looks very close to. Have you read that series, by the way?
I've not.
Oh, you got to read that. My God, you got to read that. There's some really cool stuff in there. So the idea is that you take the Neuralink concept, which is just sort of touching the surface of the brain, going a few millimeters deep. Can you do something where you insert electrodes throughout the brain, so that you're able to capture all brain activity, at least all electrical brain activity, or enough so that you could capture enough of the way your mind works that you could upload something very close to your own consciousness into a cloud setting or something like that. Have you thought about those ideas, Ryan? What do you think about that concept?
I guess I've thought about it just a little bit, but the primary motivation for me starting Neurapod in the channel was I thought like the applications for helping paralyzed patients and other forms of mental illness, which is depression, anxiety, memory loss, hearing loss, vision loss, all those things were super inspiring. So I guess going back to your question, I've thought about it a little bit. There's a company called Synchron that's working on, they're basically working on like a stent version of a brain machine interface that you can put through your veins.
They have a human trial approved. They insert electrodes into the brain, similar to what Neuralink is doing, and they come up through like the carotid artery into the brain. But I think it's only 96 electrodes, where Neuralink is like 1,000. So it's going to be much lower resolution in terms of capturing brain activity. Does that sound right?
That feels right to me. The reason I bring it up is because there are clips of Elon talking about things related to Neuralink and brain machine interfaces, artificial intelligence, before having founded Neuralink. And in those clips, he was initially talking about how you would not need an implant. Instead, you could go through this blood vessel network. And at some point, obviously, he's changed his mind on that because now they are proceeding with an implant. And so I think because he's changed his view on that, it tells me that it's unlikely that they're ever going to do that type of technique. Instead, it would probably just be a total replacement of your head. Like it would be a brain cap, and maybe they'll call it
the skull. Replace the skull. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, right. Just like the entire thing.
Right.
And I think he's even mentioned that in some events.
Yeah, well, I think the other theory is it may be easier to reach some parts of the brain using the arteries. So you could see a combination of Neuralink chips and going up through the arteries to reach, like the deeper brain may be easier. But there's this concept, and I want to get to Moon's question. So the vision I have that I'm struggling with is, if you could you upload your consciousness to the cloud, or download it onto a bot, or replicate your consciousness, have many versions of yourself on multiple bots? There's all kinds of ways that could go. Moon asked this question, or made this comment: we don't know what consciousness is, so how can we talk about uploading the human mind? I think that's a great question. I think the underlying answer to that, the fundamental answer to that, is we don't know what consciousness is yet. It may be that Neuralink and Synchron and other brain research leads us to a point where we do understand where consciousness is. And the real answer is, if you try to extract enough information out of the brain using brain-machine interfaces, and I don't know whether it makes sense to put them in a cloud, by the way, because we're geared to be in a physical space. So I don't know whether the human consciousness works disembodied, a disembodied consciousness. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But basically you try it and you put it in a bot and then see how it does. You try to extract a consciousness and then you try to interact with it and you see, and I think you could ultimately do a Turing test. Can I tell this isn't a human interacting with it? And that's the idea. So Johnny Spacer says, I can understand what Johnny, let me find Johnny.
Okay, can I address that question real quick?
Please.
So I think, yes, it probably will be possible. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, like it'll just be a duplicate of the consciousness so close that we won't be able to realize it's different, or that it's duplicated. So like you said, basically a Turing test, but for consciousness. But in order for Neuralink or any company to get to that point, like, I don't know, several decades away probably. And if we ever got to that point, we would be tackling what Elon believes is the fundamental question or approach that we should take to life. Like he's mentioned this so many times, like the goal should be to extend the scope and scale of consciousness so that we can ask the right questions, where the answer is the universe. And so Neuralink is building towards that goal faster than I think even Tesla is with AI bot, or at least it's most mission aligned with what Neuralink is doing. Maybe Tesla is further along because they have this team that's super spectacular and they have the vision and all that stuff. But I think in the longer term, whether it's a Neuralink and Tesla merger or just Neuralink, we'll be able to extend the scope and scale of consciousness just because of this whole brain-machine interface development.
Right. So Johnny Spacer says he can understand the utility of narrow AI, which is like FSD driving a car, but he doesn't understand the utility of general artificial intelligence thoughts. And my quick response to that would be, if you see a future where humanity goes extinct, this is what sparked the idea for this video in the first place. If you see a future where humanity might go extinct because we don't have enough children, if you can upload human consciousness, and essentially, this is one of my questions, I think an uploaded human consciousness would be artificial general intelligence. And let me say, so for people who don't understand that distinction, AI, artificial narrow intelligence, is tasks like driving a car, playing a game like chess or a game like Go. That's narrow intelligence. It's a form of machine learning that learns to do a particular task or work in a particular narrow window. Where artificial general intelligence, the idea is you create a robot and you install your software and the robot is able to navigate the world and do large, basically anything that a human can do, or anything that a mouse can do. It might be that you create a mouse bot that is effectively capable of doing anything a mouse can do. or a dog bot that's capable of doing anything that a dog can do. When you reach the point that the artificial general intelligence is capable of doing anything that a human can do, the next iteration of that software and hardware becomes artificial superintelligence, because it's capable of doing more than humans can do. Does that description make sense? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do think you're probably right. For practical purposes, reaching artificial or having artificial general intelligence will probably require some form of real like duplication of consciousness, because otherwise humans, I get that, like, my gut tells me that humans would be able to distinguish between whether somebody on the other side of a screen has consciousness or not, and therefore they would need it to get to like being able to fake out the other person.
Right. Just talk really quick on that. My mother has Alzheimer's, right? So you could argue that when my mother's awake, she's conscious, but she would not pass a Turing test, right? She will ask you the same questions over and over again. She will demonstrate she doesn't recall the answer. There's a lot of brain diseases. One of the things that we're hoping Neuralink can solve is curing brain diseases and helping people with brain diseases overcome them or work around them. There are humans who are conscious but are not conscious, if you follow what I'm saying. And I don't think we fully understand what consciousness is. Before we get into, I'm sorry, I just want to address a question in the chat, because I think they should have done this at the beginning. Beacon 179 says, can Ryan go into his involvement in Neuralink? I think you were an intern at Tesla at one point. You haven't worked for Neuralink, have you?
Correct on both fronts. Yeah, I was an intern at Tesla in 2015 and 2017 on different teams. 2015 was Tesla Energy Power Pack deployment, and then 2017 was with the charging infrastructure and supercharger teams. And then, yeah, I've never worked for Neuralink. I love what they're doing though. And I'm very inspired by their short-term mission primarily.
Yeah, I would say my introduction to the Elon universe was originally PayPal, because I was a PayPal customer for years. As I sold legal services on PayPal, using PayPal to collect payments. I really got fascinated with Elon with SpaceX. And then when Neuralink, so for me, like, you know, everybody knows I'm a big Tesla nut, but actually the companies I'm most excited about are SpaceX and Neuralink from a larger human perspective. And it's really pushing towards Neuralink being the biggest one because of this kind of conversation. I think this idea of, I've had this conversation a lot, like, how can we replicate artificial general intelligence, like Moon's question, when we don't really know what intelligence is? We don't really know what consciousness is. And I think if we were, it may be that the path to artificial general intelligence is Neuralink and other technologies helping us understand the brain. And if we can actually extract, not take out, but duplicate or replicate the consciousness of a human being, and maybe you start with a macaque, right? Maybe you start with a macaque monkey or a mouse or something. If you can actually replicate that consciousness, that mind, on a computer or on a bot, maybe that's the path to AGI, artificial general intelligence. Maybe the path is that you have to fully understand human intelligence by replicating it. Maybe you don't understand human intelligence until you can replicate it. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, it does make sense. It's like there's so many different things that artificial or narrow artificial intelligence could become better and smarter than humans in. And therefore, like, do we ever take that to mean that, hey, we did not actually create that narrow artificial intelligence? It's like, no, we know we created it. And despite that, the computer is better than us in that specific domain. So therefore, with artificial general intelligence, could we feasibly create something that's smarter than us in a wide variety of domains? Yeah, we totally could, because we already do that with every narrow bit of AI.
Yeah. So I just want to see, Ken asked this question, is a computer conscious? I think there's this fundamental question that we don't know what it means to be conscious. And, you know, I actually look at artificial intelligence research, and I often see, let's try to replicate this human function. I always feel like I mentioned my mom and her Alzheimer's, like, one of the things that I think artificial intelligence researchers, those who are trying to do AGI in particular, should be looking at is in what ways does the human brain function poorly, or what dysfunctions do we see with brain diseases, and what does that teach us about what consciousness is? My mother is in my mind, my mother is no longer conscious, even though she's awake at times anyway. She eats her meals, she'll have a conversation with you. The conversation is so limited, I would say she's not really conscious anymore. And I'm trying to think, when did my mother cross that bridge into being not conscious, as opposed to just confused, right? So if you go back a few years ago, my mother asked me how we met. Well, she knew I was her son. She knew my name. She could have some intelligent conversations, but the signals got crossed in her brain and she didn't realize that she should know how we met because I'm her son. So there's a lot of different ways. It's not only seen my mother as an Alzheimer's patient, but the other residents in the facility she's in, you see different people with different dysfunctions. You see a lot of that. So William says, the ability to witness, doesn't this indicate consciousness? I don't know. I think we don't know. And this is my, Carrie Simon says, we're all just speculating. General AI is pure speculation, pure. Yes, it is. But Ryan, does it make sense, this path of it's conceivable? I think you said this. I think we agree. This is decades away, uploading our consciousness. It doesn't have to be. The goal is to save the human species from extinction. Extinction is not happening for hundreds of years. So if it takes us 50 years to get to the point where we can upload consciousness, or 100 years, we're still well within the window of preserving the light of human consciousness. I don't know, for people who are on the video now, the question I asked at the beginning of the video is, number one, is it possible that Neuralink and other related technologies will enable us to upload a human consciousness into a cloud or down onto a bot? And then the second question is, if, as Elon predicts, humanity might become extinct because we don't have enough children, could uploading consciousnesses to some sort of cloud or onto bots, could that change could that solve the problem and allow us to spread the light of human consciousness, even though it's not really human anymore? So that's the idea.
Right. This kind of goes back to one of the points that I don't know if it was in a live conversation or just an offline conversation, where I mentioned the idea of Neuralink being able to have all the brain data of all the people that they've put implants in.
Yes.
And then they would, with that data, they could almost create an artificial brain. And then
a totally artificial brain, not one that comes from a human, but one comes from many humans.
Exactly. It very, very similarly to how Tesla basically recreates an artificial driver. They just take everybody's current driving data and utilize the random obscure corner cases, and then refine their model to perfect this artificial driver. Well, it would kind of be the same thing, but for a brain. And then if you take that artificial brain and pair it with a super capable Tesla bot or Optimus or whatever robot, then it's like you're almost recreating a human that is not quite human, because there's elements of consciousness that we don't understand, but it's like, yeah, really darn close.
Right. Well, that's sort of the idea, is we don't know what consciousness is yet, but if we go down this road of accessing as much of the human brain as possible through brain implants and other related technologies, and then we're able to replicate that, whether it's in a cloud or on a bot, and then we see, well, does this act humanish, right? Does this, the scary part is you upload a replica of yourself and download it onto a bot, and you have a conversation with it yourself. That's, how weird is that going to be? There's that Spider-Man meme where there's two different Spider-Man.
Oh, yeah.
And how do you know which one is which? Moon had the question I liked earlier. She says, I think we just know near nothing about consciousness, great field of science. The interesting question there is, I'm not sure that consciousness is something that's studied from a field of science, because for science, you have to measure. And I don't think we even know how to measure consciousness. I haven't seen a good, there's like whether you're asleep or awake, right? That's a 1 or 0. And maybe there's some intermediate state there, but like, how do you measure my mother's level of consciousness, a severe Alzheimer's patient's consciousness? How do you, I don't know how you measure that. I think that, I know from dealing with this question with my mother that you sort of think there's like a smooth path down the hill, and it turns out everybody's going, just a quick metaphor, we're all climbing mountains. We all start at ground level. We all climb different hills and mountains. Some people climb extremely tall mountains. Some people only climb small hills. Some people never make it up to a hill. We all end up back at the bottom at the end, and we all find different ways down the hill. So Elon, for example, has climbed many mountains, right? You know, many large mountains. Other people may have like tried to climb a small hill and not made it. But at the end, we all die. We all end up back at the ground level, and there's different paths down. So I think to some extent, consciousness relates to that. Some people just fall off a cliff, right? They get hit by a bus effectively, and they die instantly. But a lot of people have different paths of deterioration down the hill. So Moon says, what if you were trapped forever in the Amazon Web Services cloud? There's a TV show, just to relate to this, there's a TV show on Amazon Prime, oddly enough, called Upload. Have you seen that one? It's this concept of uploading your consciousness. It's really dumb in some ways, but just to get the sense, like it's a destructive process, right? You're near death, and they like scan your head. In the process, they destroy your head. That's at the very beginning. I ruined the first episode for you. But there's a bunch of silly things in the show, but that, you know, they end up in this, like, they're in this, that their minds are told they're in a resort spa, like a big hotel. And that they're somehow able to represent that. I don't know. So, all right. So one of the thoughts I had was, right. So right now there's about 8 million humans on the planet. I don't know if we're 8 million yet. We're approaching 8 billion humans. And I think on the path that we're on in terms of birth rates and death rates, we're probably going to peak around 10 billion, and we're going to start declining. If you want to spread human consciousness throughout the solar system, throughout the galaxy, humans are a bad machine format for transporting consciousness from one solar system to another, because the travel time between our solar system and the next solar system is so long that you're probably talking a minimum of 50 years. And that's not going to be a fun ride for a typical human. But if you were able to upload the human consciousness into like a server and have bots along for the ride, and when you get to the next star system, you install the human consciousness on the bot, and the bots start, you know, going down to the planets in the next system, you could spread something like human consciousness throughout the galaxy and maybe eventually the universe. And that's, you know, I think there's this question, you know, how close can we get to human consciousness, and can we get to better than human consciousness as well? Because if you take let's say you took your mind and you put it up onto a cloud server or onto a bot, and it was close enough to you that it was indistinguishable. Like, you know, you could maybe notice differences, but it was basically human level. And then you improve the hardware or you improve the software, then you become artificial superintelligence. In other words, you're able to reason faster than a human mind, right? You're able to make decisions faster. You may be able to handle larger concepts. You know, maybe you're able to add nodes, right? You're able to add, does that make sense? You're able to add synapses.
Well, I think the thing that that stands out the most to me is that when we think about just the most simple calculator, like that already gives us superhuman ability, right? Like if we're able, in our phone too, like if we're able to find anything on the internet in like 5 seconds, that capability is a superhuman power. And so there are certain aspects of our daily life that we're already way beyond what humans could have accomplished. And so this whole consciousness thing, it's like at the beginning, we won't even need to duplicate consciousness to be able to see and do and experience things that humans can't do. So in other words, like if we just equip a robot with fantastic sensors and then send that off onto Mars or to the moon or to explore, then and then we receive what the sensors are feeling and seeing and hearing, then we're extending our scope and scale of consciousness, because we're able to explore things that we wouldn't have been able to do on our own.
Well, I guess in a sense, the capability of a human has grown because of the addition of our access to the internet, for example. Right. And Elon talks about that. We're already, in a sense, cyborgs, because we're all walking around with these things, checking, details on our phones, and we're able to access things quicker. But I think, I think on a different level, if you were able to replicate human consciousness, replicate all the synapses in the brain, for example, in a cloud setting. And then you said, you know what, why don't we double the number of synapses in this brain? Right. And we came up with software to enable that consciousness to use more synapses to effectively increase its hardware. Then you might not just increase your ability to do things because you're connected better to the internet or the cloud or whatever, but you might actually make the mind more powerful. Does that make some sense?
Yeah, I think that's certainly a possibility, because it's like you can almost just duplicate your own brain. It's like, oh my goodness, you could have like 5 different versions of your own brain.
Yes,
and send them off in different like Tesla bots, and then be receiving all that input from each of them.
That's in one of the Ian Banks novels, in one of the Culture Series novels. If I remember it correctly, there are characters that are replicated thousands of times, and they're like sent into war, right?
Sure.
I might be like a cyber war. It might not have been like a physical war. It might have been like a cyber war, and their consciousness are sent in to do battle. It's crazy, really deep, really out there thinking. But I think I wanted to get to a certain point here, which was because I have these questions that Ryan and I tweeted about this, or I think it's in the video description. I have this idea for what I wanted to talk about. So I was married. My divorce was just finalized this week. We have 2 children. So I have a consciousness. My ex has a consciousness. We're still friends, by the way. We produced 2 entirely new consciousnesses. Our children are 2 completely, they're not us. They have some similarities to us, but they are each their own independent consciousnesses from us. And if our consciousness is something that can be replicated from the human brain and put into, let's say, a cloud setting or onto a bot, you wouldn't be limited necessarily to just replicating a person's consciousness. You might be able to, quote, mate 2 so whereas my consciousness is uploaded, and let's avoid the dangers of homosexuality and say my ex's or my girlfriend's consciousness is uploaded to the cloud or to a bot. Is there some way, if we can merge or mate between my consciousness and my ex's consciousness biologically to create 2 new consciousnesses, our daughters, then could the disembodied consciousnesses somehow be mated to produce new consciousnesses? I think that should make sense as doable. I mean, maybe that wouldn't be the most efficient way to do it. I think you came up with a different idea, that you take an aggregate of all the consciousness, all the brains that they've looked at and create them. But I think for consciousness to spread, it's not enough to merely replicate them. It would be far better to have an evolutionary environment where the consciousnesses are reproduced in variations that compete in some sort of way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I still maintain that the approach for the long term is probably best if we have everybody's brain and consciousness data, because it's like you can mate 2 consciousnesses and then produce one entirely new one, and it's probably taking the best aspects of both of them the majority of the time. And so it's like, well, what if you could just add a 3rd mate and a 4th and a 5th and an infinite number of mates to that consciousness and merge like all of them together and then output one? Then it's probably going to take the best of each of those consciousnesses the majority of the time. And then the output's going to be like unequivocally better than just a mating of 2 consciousnesses.
Yeah. Let me just really quick, I just saw some regular people in the chat. I want to say hi to Be Nice. I want to say hi to Mark Plott and the other moderators. Thank them. I want to mention the t-shirts. This is the appropriate t-shirt for this conversation. What's outside the simulation? It's a question Elon Musk asked when Lex Friedman asked him if he had one question to ask, what would it be? I think this relates to the simulation hypothesis in a great way. And you can get t-shirts like this on elonbits.com. So there's a link in the video description below to elonbits.com. There's also a link to Ryan's channel, Neurapod, and there's links to, I wanted to thank YouTube channel members, Patreon supporters. Do you have a Patreon as well, Ryan?
I do. Neurapod, yeah, patreon.com/Neurapod.
Yeah, so Patreon supporters and my daily live channel on locals, warrenredlick.locals.com, links to all that in the description below. I don't think I have a link to Ryan's Patreon, but I've linked to Ryan's channel, and he probably has a link to his Patreon from his channel, but it's patreon.com/Neurapod for Ryan. So sorry, there was this question here or a comment here from I don't know how to pronounce this, Yehuvi. Maybe consciousness isn't compatible with non-biological storage. I think the cloud would just be an SD card with algorithms. It's an interesting take. So the Neuralink approach, Ryan, is you're looking at electrical impulses only, right? It's not looking at the chemistry of the brain. It's not looking at the quantum effects inside the brain, right? It's just looking at electrical impulses. The brain, of course, is a chemical and electrical entity. And I was talking with somebody yesterday who said there may be quantum effects that contribute to consciousness. I don't know how, anyway, we fundamentally can't measure that without changing it if you follow quantum physics. So do you think the chemistry issue, say, is something that would make it impossible to upload consciousness, or do you think that it may be that electrical impulses are enough?
To get to, full consciousness, it seems to me that we would have to have the chemical component. Right now, you're correct. Like Neuralink, at least publicly, has never stated that they're working on the chemical side. But it wouldn't surprise me in the future if they end up like realizing, oh, this is something that we do need to be investigating and a part of. And maybe it's just in the form of like you take some medicine daily and then pair that with a brain machine interface that's electrical in nature, and then all of a sudden you get a really, really good brain machine interface.
Okay, let me just see. So there's this idea, I don't know, I just have this vision of we're traveling. So we're already thinking about, we've got Tesla bot coming, and we're going to launch rockets to the moon. And you could launch humans to the moon, or you could launch humans to Mars. When you launch a human to the moon, you've got to supply them with oxygen. You got to keep them warm, keep them not too warm. You got to keep them fed. And when the human gets to the moon, you have to protect them from the non-atmosphere. When you get them to Mars, you have to protect them from the very thin atmosphere, and they can't breathe. If you, instead of sending a human to the moon, you sent 10 Tesla bots, or Mars, right? If you send 10 Tesla bots with a human, the bots can do a lot of tasks that the human can't do. And if you take that further and you say, you know what, we're going to get to the point where we can upload consciousnesses and download them onto bots, you can see how space exploration gets a lot more efficient. Because when you send bots to the moon, you could probably send 10 bots for every human, right? Because they don't need oxygen, they don't need food. You just probably have to keep them above a certain minimal temperature and not let them get too hot. And they probably have a much broader temperature range than humans can handle. And once you get to the moon, they can operate without a suit, right? They could operate on the moon without a spacesuit, probably. I mean, maybe they need some kind of heating to keep warm. Same thing on Mars. They would be able to operate in the Martian atmosphere without, so it seems like once bots are trained to do a lot of tasks, they're going to make a lot of sense. And then it just seems to me like, yeah, it's 50 or 100 years down the road, we might be able to get some level of consciousness into the bots. I wonder if is this too deep? And then, because that trip to Alpha Centauri is like a 50-year trip, right? If you send humans, they might die on the way. If you send bots it's much easier to preserve the bots and the consciousness is on a server on a ship than it is to preserve the human bodies. Does that make sense?
Yeah, this reminds me of something that Max Hodak, the former president and co-founder of Neuralink, tweeted. He was saying that it's likely that it's going to be significantly easier. Maybe I'm misquoting him a little bit, but he said something along the lines of, it's going to be significantly easier to adapt humans to Mars, the Mars environment, than it will be to adapt Mars environment to the current humans. So it's like the same thing that you're talking about. Like we could we could adapt ourselves by including different, I don't know, spacesuits or different prosthetics and stuff, or we could just have robots and send them to Mars and then learn quite a bit about the environment, bring them back, and then determine what's going to be optimal for us.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just checking. I'm checking on how this is going here.
If there's a little gap, I kind of want to go back to what you were talking about. You know, so you mentioned the war where there's potentially like robot wars. And I don't know if you saw the video that I made, but basically there was this time that I mentioned what Elon talked about on the Hardcore History podcast with Dan Carlin. Did you watch that? Dan Carlin.
I have. It's the only thing Elon has done recently I haven't watched. I guess I should watch that.
Okay. Yeah, it was actually just an audio podcast, but it was pretty interesting because it's like I had no idea. You know, it's like I've listened to the vast majority of things that Elon has publicly talked about, and it was one of the first time. It was the first time. It was the first time that I've heard him talk about his depth of recall with historic events. And you could already kind of get a sense that, okay, this guy is super knowledgeable because of all the books that he's read and all the information that he's consumed and experience that he's gathered. But being able to hear him talk about historic events in quite a bit of detail and understand like the nuances of what happened with given war events was super interesting. One of the things that he mentioned, or I guess the primary thing during that conversation, is that technology is underrated in its impact. Technology and engineering are underrated in their impact in the history of war. And
that's like that's like the fighter plane thing he was talking about, right? I heard that part where he's talking about the different the fuel for the engines, and you could make better fighter planes if you had better, more consistent fuel.
Right? Well, it's like, would you prefer to have a bad pilot and a good plane, or a non-technically advanced engineered plane and a fantastic pilot? It's like, well, most of the time you want the best plane because you want to be able to make sure that you're not dying on the way back just because you had a faulty plane. And so one of the things that he ends up talking about is in the future, we're going to have such good technology and the robots and drones will be able to do things that humans can't, and the impact on civilian life will be zero if you're just having bots and drones die during wars. And so because of that, it will probably increase the likelihood that we'll have wars and decrease the impact on civilians for those wars. So he thinks like wars will increase, the impact of them on civilians will decrease.
Okay, so a couple of things in the chat here. R. Dotton says, why do we care if it's conscious as long as it works? I think that my thoughts to that basically is, I'm not sure we even know what consciousness is. So, and I guess it also depends on what do you mean by it works? What does it mean to work? I think the vision that I have is we have created this civilization on Earth. We're starting the very beginnings of spreading that civilization to the moon and to Mars. Very, very, you know, there's human created objects that are now on the moon and on Mars and maybe a couple other places in the solar system or traveling through the solar system. But the ability to take conscious beings and put them on other rocks, whether it's the moon or Mars or Europa, beyond Ganymede, whatever, that potential, and create new civilizations, right? You know, I think somebody said to me, once we create a colony on Mars, we're going to have two humanities, right? Martians will actually become a different species because the distance is so great. It's an interesting theory. I'm not saying he's correct, but the potential for civilizations to grow and spread is really kind of an interesting idea. Any thoughts on that, Ryan? Because I got another one there.
Yeah, I have a hard time thinking that it would be so different. Just like how if you plop somebody in the middle of Africa and somebody in the middle of South America or Australia, is like, how different are they? It's like, I
But,
think the more different that they are, the more we realize they're like really similar.
but over generations, they might evolve differently, and that might lead to different species. Anyway,
Possibly.
so Machu Picchu says, isn't growing babies in test tubes a la Brave New World like an easier, if not super ethical way to save humanity from depopulation? Sounds better than Handmaid's Tale. I did a clubhouse. I've talked about this topic before. I think, ideally you'd find a way that the average woman would have more than 2 children. It turns out that women don't, modern women at least, are not that excited about having children. When I was, I'm 55, Ryan is much younger than me. When I was, and I think we've talked about this topic before about the humanity, the future of humanity. When I was in high school, and as a child growing up, there was a constant message. I don't know if I could quantify it or explain where it came from, but there was this constant message that there was sort of this obligation for me to go out and find somebody to have children with. And women also got that message. Young women also got that message. And so our socialized to some extent, we're guided by this idea we're supposed to find somebody to marry and have kids with. And the men were looking for that, and the women were looking for that. The young men were looking. And now, and I think Ryan could comment on his generation, I feel like a lot of, since I'm now dating a 30-year-old, and because I want to have kids again, I have seen my sense of young people today. You young whippersnappers don't have this. You didn't get the same message. Your generation maybe did not get the same message that it's like this fundamental obligation to be fruitful and multiply, to go out and find somebody to marry and have kids with. And I feel like, not you specifically, Ryan, but for a lot of people in their 20s, they're not thinking that way. That's not the message they got hammered down their throats from the age of 0 to 20. What are your thoughts on that?
Right. Yeah, I certainly don't feel that pressure. I do inherently, like, my own personality wants and desires to have lots of kids, but it's not something that I felt any societal pressure on. And I think girls, it's like different from guys for sure. They probably have a little bit more pressure, but I don't think our generation as a whole necessarily has that pressure.
So it's almost like I call it the categorical imperative. We're supposed to be fruitful and multiply. Above that, so this idea of growing babies in test tubes, how do you create, like, I would say we already live in a dystopia, right? No, we don't live in a utopia, and the world has some very serious imperfections. Like your description of the wars, of how wars will be fought, like that sounds so dystopian to me, and that sounds a little bit Brave New Worldish, actually.
No, that sounds awesome, actually. To me, that sounds fantastic.
Well, it'd be better if we didn't have wars at all, wouldn't it?
Yes, absolutely, like 100%. It's like, it kills me that they exist. It's like cigarettes. It's like, why do they exist? But I mean, if there's 0 civilian casualties and just drones or robots pass away, like, I don't know, break, that's fantastic.
Okay, I don't know that those who wage war would be satisfied. Like, if I'm going to lose by only fighting with the machines, then I got to start killing humans to change the game. Unfortunately, I think we're governed by sociopaths. So anyway, Machu Picchu, I've thought about, can we create a dystopian way that encourages women to have more children? One of my ideas is, can we allow women to monetize their fertility? And not that every woman would choose to do so, but if 10% of the women decided to have 20 children each, right, then that would get you to your magic 2. And if just a few of the other women had 1 child, you'd be over your 2, and the human population would continue to grow. And I should mention here, there's a lot of people who think that there's too many humans on the planet, that we're exceeding the carrying capacity of the planet, and we're destroying the earth, and we need fewer humans. And I'm not coming from that premise, and Elon does not operate from that premise. Elon believes that the earth can carry a lot more people, and I believe the earth can carry a lot more people. And moreover, if we're going to spread the light of consciousness to the moon, Mars, and beyond, we're going to need a lot more humans if we want to spread, unless we're going to do it with bots loaded with human consciousnesses or other consciousnesses.
Yeah, that point about underpopulation versus overpopulation being an issue is a hill that I'll die on every day. Like, I'm so strongly I have a lot of conviction that underpopulation is going to be I have a lot of confidence that it's definitely a huge issue relative to overpopulation. Like overpopulation is not going to be our issue. I have less conviction that it's the primary issue that's going to affect the world in the next decade, but it could be. Like it could be. I think if there's something that's going to really just like put us in a recession, it's probably going to start with this whole labor shortage issue. And a lot of it is due to underpopulation. And then I think alongside that, I want to also clarify the number, the magic 2 number that you're citing for women.
Yeah, it's really 2.1, right?
Yeah, right now I think the world is at 2.1. I don't think that's a magic number. I think it's actually a false number, because like you just take it to the extreme and say that every single baby being born right now is a man. Then what happens? Like, do women need to have 2 babies to continue to sustain the population on Earth? No, they would need to have way more than 2. So that 2 number happens to be correct right now. But if you take countries like Latvia, they have way more women than men. So
that's where I should go look for a girlfriend. Sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, I mean, it's just that there is no necessary magic number there. It's just the birth rate has to exceed the death rate. And right now, people are living longer and longer. So that's a negative influence on our society and work in general. And then on top of that, people are delaying having kids. So that's another negative effect. And then they're having fewer kids. That's another negative effect. And the longer that people live, right now at least, their lifespan is increasing, but their health span is not. Therefore, the last portion of their life is increasing, even though they're not productive. There's another negative impact. So it's like all of these things, the confluence of all of them is terrible for society. Like we need more working people. Yeah.
Okay. I want to thank Digital Jeff for the super chat. He says, why don't we just settle the war inside the metaverse through a game of Fortnite? I think the answer to that is the same answer I said before, that the sociopaths who run countries will not be satisfied if they're losing in a metaverse war or in a bot war, and they will start killing people on the other side in order to try to win the war. It's just the reality is that we're governed by sociopaths. And I know people want to believe that their sociopaths are better than the other sociopaths, but they're all sociopaths, nearly all. So, all right. So let's just talk really quick. I think let's take a break from this topic for a second and let's just talk about Tesla for a minute, because you were an intern at Tesla, correct? I think I already asked you this earlier. Okay, so we just had some big Tesla. Sorry, folks, we're going to shift a little bit. We'll come back to this topic in a minute, but I just wanted to, I just did a video about earnings, and the big news was Tesla had their earnings call, their investor call. I'm assuming you watched it, right?
Yep. On Tesla Daily with Rob Maurer.
Oh, did you watch it with Rob? Okay, so I would say generally speaking, it was, for me, it was good news. What I find comical is Wall Street reacted badly to the news that, say, the Cybertruck was on hold or the $25,000 car was on hold. And I was like, well, when they announced Cybertruck, they said it was a bad thing. When they announced the $25,000 car, Wall Street said, it's like, whatever Tesla announces is bad news. So the thing that you said before was bad news. Now that you're putting it on hold, that's bad news too. I wish Wall Street would make up their minds. But what was your general sense of, what did you take away from the Tesla Q4 earnings call and the roadmap, the product roadmap?
Yeah, since 2015, I've had incredible conviction in just like where the company is headed. And I actually, so there's this YouTuber that started creating content recently. His name is Farzad Misbahi. He used to work at Tesla for, I think, 4 years. My goodness, I like what he talks about with Tesla. It resonates so directly with me. Like one of the things that he recently said with his conversation with Stephen Mark Ryan was the talent advantage at Tesla is the primary thing that's like their primary advantage. There's like set everything aside, and it's like, what stock do you want to buy? It's the one that has the best talent and the best access to talent, and the best utilization of that talent. So it's like those three things. Those are the core elements of any company, big or small. It's most noticeable with the smaller the company, but it's like you extrapolate that out, and then the effects of it become more pronounced. So it's like if you have I always like to think of it as like every individual employee has a factor of 0 to 2 and in their impact, and the product of each of their numbers is whatever that factor is. That's the resultant product, that's the output. So if you have 3 employees and they're each a factor of 2, then you're going to get 2 times 2 times 2, and you get a pretty high quality product. If they're each below 1 or below average, and they have a factor, or they have a number of 0.9, then you have 0.9 times 0.9 times 0.9. That product is that much worse than a 2 times 2 times 2. And then if you have Tesla,
that's 0.72, I think, something like that.
Yeah, okay, that sounds right. And then let's say you extrapolate that out to 100,000 employees at Tesla, and they're each at least a 1.5. Like Elon always talks about, excellence is average. Then, oh my goodness, the advantage is gigantic. It's unbelievable. And so, yeah, I don't know, that's kind of a rant I've been wanting to say if I had my own channel, but yeah, the talent advantage is huge. That was further reinforced by this Q4 call to me, and all the short-term noise that Wall Street cares about is pretty ridiculous, because the demand for Model Y and Model 3 is gigantic, and in the longer term, like Cybertruck demand will be huge. Semi-truck demand, I'm like financially, I'm more excited about semi-truck than Cybertruck. And then all this wavering on the solar is so short-term, short-sighted in my eyes. And then the thing that I'm most excited about for Tesla is the Tesla energy storage component of the business, and how it's connected via software. It's just so underrated, so underappreciated, like literally underappreciated.
Well, they're just waiting for the supply chain to be adequate to scale solar and Powerwall and Megapack, right? As long as the supply chain is limited, it's hard to justify making large volumes of something that's less, because the cars are so profitable. It's hard to justify taking the same components and making Tesla energy products, because you're just going to make less profit, and you're probably accelerating the transition less. The transition to sustain. You're probably accelerating the transition to sustainable energy more by making a Model Y than you are by installing a $50,000 Model Y than you are by installing a $50,000 solar roof. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but the primary thing for the energy business is the cell constraints. Well, actually, it's the chip constraints, and then the cell constraints. Yeah, for the energy storage business. So to me, it's like, okay, if I mean, Tesla obviously knows better than I, but it's like, if all else being equal, it's like, do you want to have a Megapack or the equivalent number of cells for vehicles? It's like, well, I think the Megapack impact. Oh yeah, it is. It's like the Megapack impact. Like, you can just think about, like, okay, how big is the energy market versus the energy production market versus the transportation market? Like, obviously the energy market is way bigger, so yes, people should be more excited about that than the vehicles.
Yeah. Really quick, I want to thank Johnny Spacer for the super chat, and I wanted to see Mark Plott said a couple things. Mark Plott is a longtime moderator on my channel's chats, and Mark says, he said something about, it's not just having parents, it's not having children through bad parents. And I'm going to disagree with that a little bit, but I want to relate to it. And he also said something about minimum age, lower minimum marriage age to 16, and give some financial support for a 16-year-old parent. So we're going back to the concept of how are we going to keep humanity going if the population starts shrinking, if we don't have enough kids. I hate to say it, but bad parents are better than no parents. if you want human consciousness to spread, bad parents are better than not having parents, because you don't have, you got to get the number above 2, even if it means not the best parents. There is the movie Idiocracy. Did you see that movie, Ryan?
No, I haven't. I'm such a bad movie goer.
No, it's a really dumb movie. We watched it on our drive across the country with Kristen and Omar and my brother. We watched Idiocracy, and the premise is that the smart people don't have kids and only the dumbest people have kids. And when you take that, iterate that over generations, you end up with a society of idiots who don't know how to do anything. And somehow the society keeps running. There's a lot of things that were dumb about the movie, but the basic premise, like if you watch the first 10 minutes, you could just skip the rest, because the rest is just a dumb story. But
there's good reason for that occurring. It's because like back in the day, like everybody needed to produce kids to produce labor, and labor is the fundamental way that people can advance. And so if they didn't have labor to produce more output on the farm, then they would not be able to sustain their lives.
Right.
So it's like now the smarter that people get, the more that they can plan, and the more that they can make sure that they have adequate resources for the baby to thrive, rather than have the baby to produce more output.
Yeah. Well, I didn't have my children to produce output, and I had them because I believed it was sort of like I just believe in it. I don't even know if I would call it an obligation. I just believed in it. Mark goes on to say, lower the minimum marriage age to 16 and give financial support for 16-year-old parents. The problem with this, because I have, my own idea about letting women monetize their breeding, and maybe 10% of the women choose careers as breeders, is where's the money come from, right? And, will millionaire men pay, $100,000 a child to a woman to have a child with them? Or will older couples that can't have children because they, something went wrong, will they pay for a woman to be a surrogate for them? I think you end up with this complicated situation that's hard to make it. It's not as easy to make it work as you think. And, where's the money come from to pay these 16-year-old girls to have children? And is 16 too young? And is that dystopian, even though that was normal 100 years ago for 16-year-olds to get married and have children?
Yeah, I think just practically speaking, I think it probably would, solve the underpopulation issue. But it's like I kind of worry most about the impact on the child, right? Like the emotional and psychological impact on the child. It's like having, I don't know, like I was an accident, but it's like I don't think that like that does not bother me. I know people that it kind of bothers them that they were in an accident, but it's like, yeah, it just doesn't bother me.
I don't see why it matters. I actually don't know whether I was intentional or an accident. They never told me. Randy Radcliffe asked, anybody making money with TSLA, with Tesla stock? Randy, I started buying Tesla stock in February 2016. I can assure you I'm well ahead. I'm not making money on it because I'm not selling it. Ryan, what year did you start buying Tesla stock?
2015. Just being with the team, like it's crazy to me. The team is amazing, like super smart, super passionate, work really, really hard. And you have all of them working together. And it's just like, it's just
I wanted to mention this on your point about having talent. I think one of the other essential things that Elon Musk companies have, all of them, because I was at Starbase and I talked to SpaceX employees there. I was at the Plaid event. I talked to Tesla employees there. I talked to other employees, and I have this sense of the companies. Number one, Elon assembles great talent. We know that. But I think the way he does it is, first, he starts with an outlandish mission, a mission that's nearly impossible, that many people think is impossible, like reusing orbital rocket boosters, right? Like rapid reusable, going to Mars and establishing a colony, switching the world to electric vehicles, and accelerating the transition, curing brain disease, right? He sets out outlandish goals. Let's do something that people thought was impossible. And he believes it, and he delivers the message well, and it attracts bright engineers. Does that make sense? And so one of the reasons they're able to attract the talent is because there's a mission that people believe in, and then he works insanely hard himself, setting an example. And then if you are a very talented, hardworking person and you see him working harder than you, it inspires you to work harder as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and to me, the thing that drives this home the most is Elon's quote about people respond to precedents and superlatives. And so if you say like we're going to be the first humans on Mars, or we're going to have the biggest rocket ever created, like people respond to that. They just they buy into that. And so
Right.
I think with Tesla at the beginning, it was like, oh well, this is a necessity for the world. I don't believe that it's truly necessary to accelerate the advent of sustainable energy, but it's gonna be eventually. So
Right.
it's like we might as well do it, and we're gonna look back and be like, okay, why wasn't this energy produced sustainably? It's like,
Well, also, once you
ridiculous.
drive a Tesla, right? Like driving it into it, it sounds like we're making the world a better place environmentally. And I suppose I should be excited that I'm only burning electrons as I drive down the road, right? When I drive really fast and I leave a trail of electrons behind me, it's a lot better than leaving a trail of exhaust from CO, carbon monoxide or whatever. By the way, folks, we don't actually burn the electrons. That would be inhumane. We don't burn. I was wondering, by the way, do you ever you have a Tesla, right?
Yeah.
Do you ever hear like a knocking or pinging? I think they're using lower octane and the superchargers.
No, yeah, it's a pop.
I genuinely hear this noise in my car, and it sounds a little bit like, the carburetor's off or something, or the fuel injectors aren't quite on pace. Like, I know that's not what's happening. There's some little like popping noise or something I hear once in a
Yeah.
while. Like, oh, I
It's
must have
a
gotten some
pressure
bad.
pop.
I just, is that right?
Yeah.
I just thought maybe I got some bad electrons at the last supercharger. So no, but I think it's number one, environmentally, obviously our vehicles are better for the environment than the other vehicles on the road, but they're just better. They're more fun to drive. They're amazing. When's the last time you drove a gasoline or diesel vehicle?
I had to drive a hybrid. I had to drive my mom's hybrid. Yeah, like I don't know. It's totally not as fun. And to me, that's like the most cool thing about what Tesla's done and what Elon and the team have been able to create is a product that's so compelling, regardless of whether it's an electric vehicle or not. Like that's what drives true long-term adoption, right? Because like before, like you could have as many Priuses in the world as you want and incentivize them in the short term with these financial incentives, but that's never going to be the long-term solution in any industry. It's like you need to be able to have a compelling product that, regardless of what it does for the environment, is better in every way, and that's what Tesla's been able to do.
Right. Because I want to do one more Tesla topic. I want to come back to Robert Hirsch has a comment in the chat that brings us back to the brain, the uploading our consciousness. So I've been thinking about getting an RV and driving around the country, towing it with a Tesla. And I have an order for a Model X Plaid, which is relatively long range, right? It's a stupid purchase, right? Because it's so insanely expensive. The theory being that if I drive it around for a year and then I sell it in order to buy my Cybertruck, I might actually sell it at a profit later. I don't know. I'm probably not going to go through with the Model X Plaid at this point. But I was actually thinking, like, the big thing about towing is range. And I was actually thinking maybe I should just get a long range Model 3. Like, I think the new long range Model 3s are around 360 or 370 miles of range. So if you cut the range in half, you're actually getting pretty good range out of it for towing. Have you ever thought about towing with it? Do you have a Model 3S? What do you drive?
I have a Model Y long range.
Okay. And do you ever tow with it?
I've never towed with it. I don't think it would be fun to do a long distance towing trip though.
Why is that?
Just the range issue. Like you would be going to every supercharger along the way and having to spend like an hour rather than having to spend less than 30 minutes.
Right. So the guy, I just watched this one video and the guy said, look, you usually travel 500 or 600 miles a day when you're towing with a gasoline powered vehicle. So if you just figure, all right, I'm going to drive for a couple hours and charge and drive for a couple hours and charge. And while I'm charging, I'm hanging out in my RV, right? It's not so bad. It's not like you're just sitting there with nothing to do at the gas station. You're sitting in your RV doing whatever you'd be doing in your RV anyway. And his attitude was, I travel about the same distance with my Tesla towing an RV that I would with so you know, I think people have this idea though that the Model X and the Cybertruck are designed for towing and the Model 3 is not. And technically the Model 3 isn't really supposed to tow, or maybe you can do its towing hitch, but this guy had the setup that was pretty good. And I think if you come up with a more efficient trailer, one with less frontal surface area in particular, there's this trailer called Trail Matter that folds down to be 7 feet tall instead of 10 feet tall. So and it's only, I think, 7 feet wide instead of 8 feet wide. So the rectangle you're pulling through the air is a lot smaller. So I think you can get a lot more efficiency out of it. But anyway, I was just thinking that the Model 3 long range might be the best choice simply because it has the longest range. Anyway, that was an idea. All right, so let me go back to the consciousness side. It sounds like you're not into the towing concept. So
yeah, I think just wait for the Cybertruck. wait a couple of years.
Yeah. So Robert Hirsch says, just entered, this talk of consciousness rather than a brain blueprint seems misguided. We don't know what consciousness is. Robert, we talked about that earlier in the video. What is consciousness? I think the answer is that we would essentially learn a lot about consciousness through Neuralink and through other technologies like Neuralink, like Synchron, that is coming at brain and machine interfaces another way. We may learn a lot more about what consciousness is. I think there's a question. Do you think, Ryan, that consciousness is fundamentally unknowable? We can't really know what it is?
Yeah, my heart says yes and my brain says no. That's what Elon would say. Yeah, and that's what I believe too. Like, it feels unknowable, but just based on everything that we see and experience with what's going on with artificial intelligence and compute, it's like, yeah, we're probably going to get to a place where we will be able to understand consciousness. And at least if we can get close enough to the limit, then it's going to feel like we do understand it. You know, so maybe it's just an asymptote and we get like super close and we feel like that's probably what it is.
Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry, going back to the towing thing for a second, as I see some comments in the chat. Mark Klott, who's our longtime moderator, says Model 3 is not rated for towing in the United States. It may not be rated for towing. There's a video I just watched on YouTube this morning where this guy in Canada set up his Model 3, and he runs an RV place, so he knows exactly how to set it up, and he built his own towing hitch, or they have a way of doing a towing hitch that's a lot more sturdy. And they were towing a 6,000 pound Airstream trailer, and it drove very well. And Mark said that range would go down from 300 miles would go down to less than 100 miles towing. No, they were only losing about half the range, and that was towing a much larger Airstream with a much bigger frontal surface area. So, I was thinking about towing like a 2,500 or 3,000 pound RV with this Trail Matter folds up, so it ends up being much less frontal surface area. So I think it would be a lot less drag, and you might get 60 or 70% of range with that. So Andy Onion says, why will anyone buy FSD when you can buy a Tesla bot to drive you around instead? My short answer to that is Tesla bot will not be trained to drive. Hold on one second, please. Someone coming through the gate in my neighborhood, sorry. So does that make sense that Tesla bot is not likely to be trained to drive a car?
You know, when Tesla bot first came out, I was thinking like, okay, well, maybe this is just like part of the reason that they're doing this is to hedge their autonomy plans. It's like if they get 99.9999% autonomy and they're not able to add an additional 9, then maybe you just stick in a Tesla bot into the driver's seat and it's able to do the charging, it's able to clean the car so that the cameras can always see, it's able to respond to given situations with, like, if it gets pulled over for a ticket or whatever. Actually, maybe not that point, but I don't know. It's just able to like deliver packages, let's say. Yeah, I think eventually there will be Optimus or Tesla bot inside the fleet of Tesla vehicles, because they're just, yeah, you just like deliver packages alone. Like that use case, I think, is really powerful.
Well, James Dalmas' theory is that you wouldn't bother having the car. Tesla bot would just ride a scooter or maybe just wear roller skates. And, it would, if it's delivering a package that's not in a hurry, the cost of transporting goods in a much smaller, it might be much more efficient to have Tesla bot literally make deliveries on like a skateboard, like an actual human's skateboard, than having it drive a car. The other thing is the Tesla bot is not going to have the same camera setup as the car, right? So, and it's going to have more latency because it's not hardwired into the cameras the way that the car is set up. So I don't think Tesla bot could ever be as good of a driver as FSD can be. That's my thinking on that. Just see. I think that we've kind of covered. I wanted to talk about Boring Company really quick because Elon mentioned Boring Company on the chat on the earnings call, which was kind of a surprise. What do you think about the danger that robotaxi networks lower the cost of transportation so much that the roads become overcrowded? Do you think that's a real risk?
Yes. Yeah. Like we're already having this huge traffic issue, but it's like, imagine if the utility of every car gets better. It's just like, if you just think about one vehicle that's currently parked in a garage, and now all of a sudden it's able to have utilization and not be parked in a garage, then that's one additional like incremental car on the road. And then you just extrapolate that out and say, well, that's happening for every single car in this neighborhood, or every single Tesla in this neighborhood. And then you all of a sudden have like 5 cars that are all out on the road. And then you just do that for the next neighborhood over and over and over. And it's like, yeah, okay, there's definitely going to be more cars. And Elon's proposed solution is boring tunnels and double-decker highways, which I don't know. It sounds so expensive to do that.
I think his main solution is just boring tunnels. I think that the potential, for those people who watch my channel know this, I am like this huge believer in the Boring Company. I think the Boring Company changes transportation like forever. Like things like if you have a city and you have this old bridge and you need to replace it, and you figure out, okay, it's going to cost us, $2 billion to replace this big bridge. And Elon comes along and says, hey, I can do 4 tunnels for you for $50 million, right? Then, like, why would anybody ever replace a bridge again? It seems like such a no-brainer that the vast majority of human transportation is going to be done through tunnels. That this kind of transportation will be done through tunnels. Like you wouldn't bother building bridges anymore. And in a lot of situations, oh, this highway is congested. It's such an easy solution to just bore a tunnel underneath. Like, have you been to the Florida Keys?
No, I've only been. Well, I've been to. I actually don't know. I've been to Tampa.
Okay, no. So the southern tip of Florida is Miami. Miami is basically near the southern tip of Florida. And you go south from that and get to this string of keys, or it's basically a string of islands that stretches southwest, really. And basically there's like one road that's mostly one or 2 lanes each way all the way. And it just ends up with these huge traffic jams because there's no way around it, right? It's just one line. Thank you, Gianluca, for your support. Can't wait for Neuralink for walk again. I send mail every day for that great interview. I think Gianluca is probably in a wheelchair and is somebody who is hopeful that Neuralink will cure whatever is causing your inability to walk, perhaps a spinal cord issue. So very much appreciate your support, and very hopeful that Neuralink will get there for you. So with the highway that runs, along the Keys, if you just ran tunnels underneath, you would double the bandwidth of the roadways, and the people who are going straight through would have a much quicker way through. You wouldn't have to worry about hitting pedestrians. There's a lot of reasons, and you could build more tunnels. You could just go deeper and dig another set of tunnels further underneath. There's so much potential for that. And I look at Boring Company. Boring Company right now has about 2 miles of tunnel in Las Vegas. I think they're about to expand to 30 miles of tunnel in Las Vegas. I think Vegas will ultimately have, let's say, 100 miles of boring tunnels. And there's 1,000 cities on Earth that are roughly the size of Las Vegas, more or less, taking a broad scope, either much significantly bigger or a little smaller. If you did 1,000 cities with 100 miles of tunnel each, you'd have 100,000 miles of tunnel. That's 50x where Boring Company is now. And then you could do intercity tunnels. And I think I've told you my boring Bering idea before, right? Mm-hmm. What if you did tunnels under the Bering Strait? Let me just see. All right, so a Christy Brinkley transformer model plaid that does dishes. I think I would marry that. Okay, that's a great note to wrap up. I think we've kind of covered a lot. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about before we wrap up today's live stream, Ryan?
No, I appreciate you having me on again, though. Love talking about these things.
Yeah. All right. So I want to thank everybody for joining in. We tried a YouTube live stream again. We'll see whether YouTube treats us okay. I want to thank Ryan in particular for joining me to do this. Thank the moderators. Thank the channel members. The chat was subscriber only, so the chat was a little quieter than usual, and I think it was a lot better quality than usual, actually. So I think I'm going to stick with subscriber only chats in the future. Machu Picchu says robo-taxis will reduce traffic through better driving. Interesting. All right. So thanks everyone for watching. Please check out my other videos. Please support the channel on Patreon. Support Ryan's channel on Patreon. Everywhere else, links in the description below. Check out the t-shirts on elonbits.com. And thanks everyone for watching. Ryan, stay with me. So thanks very much for doing this. Off